I am selling my Rubik's Cube collection. No, not all of it. No, I'm not quitting cubing, and no, I'm not quitting YouTube, but I am desperately in need of some more shelf space. You're looking at around a third of my puzzles, which I bought for very specific videos over the years, but never really had any use for afterwards. So rather than sitting on my shelves for eternity, I figure these puzzles are better off in your guys' hands, and a lot of them at around half the price that you'd normally pay. If you're not interested in buying anything, this will just be a fun mini cube collection video. And if you are interested, stay tuned to hear details about every individual puzzle I'm selling. Oh, and one more thing, I'll be giving away tons of signed bags, screwdrivers, cube stands, and cube boxes along the way, so be sure and check the description of this video for some detailed instructions on how to claim these for free. As you can see, we'll be starting out with a whole ton of force cubes, followed by some non-WCA puzzles, and then some WCA puzzles, including some smart cubes down there. But first, force cubes. If you don't know, these are really cool looking solid color cubes that you make by taking a bunch of stickerless puzzles and then rearranging the pieces. Normally it's really hard to get your hands on just one color of these, but today is your chance. I'm actually personally keeping one of each kind, which is why you don't quite see all the colors up here. These specifically are the transparent 2x2 force cubes, definitely one of the cooler looking sets, and made out of a puzzle that has long since been discontinued. Next up are the transparent 3x3 force cubes. This was actually the first set of force cubes that I made, and the only ones that I've ever stickered with these cool looking transparent stickers. It's a rare type of force cube that you're actually able to solve, and in the interest of full transparency, the green one is missing a center cap. It'll be a little bit cheaper because of that. Unfortunately, I have no idea where it went. My force pyraminxes were made out of the original Diane pyraminx, one of the very first stickerless pyraminxes that came out. Because of that, the turning is not great, although it's not bad either. Most of the ball bearings have been removed to make it feel a little bit nicer. The force cubes are pretty self-explanatory, just some solid, good-looking force cubes made out of some older Chi puzzles with ball bearings. One thing to note though is that the white one does have some ugly marks on it from having to remove the logos, so I'll make that one a little bit cheaper too. The 4x4 force cubes, say that 10 times fast, are also really good looking, made out of a slightly more modern puzzle, and there's actually a really cool mod that you can do by combining two of these together into a checker pattern. It's actually really fun to solve. So I mean, if you wanted to buy two of them, I'd be happy to combine them for you. Just let me know during checkout in the order comments. The shiny force cubes are some of my absolute favorite puzzles. These are the 2x2s right here, and as you can see, they just look stunning. These are made out of the magnetic version of the Cyclone Boys shiny 2x2, which is why they're a little bit expensive. The cubes turn really well, except they lock up like crazy. The shiny 3x3 force cubes, once again, some of my absolute favorite looking puzzles, and once again made out of the magnetic Cyclone Boys 3x3s. One thing to note is that these things are absolute magnets to fingerprints and scratches. The fingerprints can wipe off pretty easily, but these do have a handful of little tiny scratches, nothing all too noticeable though. The shiny force pyraminxes were actually originally made by Shengshao, but they're pretty much the same thing, just great looking magnetic turning shininess. The unicorn force cubes, also known as the world's most useless force cubes for obvious reasons, are just a fun, silly little project made out of a cheap puzzle. And the same deal goes with the tetrahedral version, equally useless, more of just a fun little cheap fidget toy than an actual puzzle. This is a really unique one, the Chi force clocks. I'm actually selling both of them because, well, I don't need any more clocks in my life. Even though there's only two of them, it's actually one of the hardest force cubes to make just because of how the mechanism works, but it's also the only force cube that's WCA legal and actually turns really well. It's pretty much just like an out-of-the-box Chi clock. So even if you just do clock in competition and want to make your puzzle look a little bit different than anyone else's, well, this might be a good option. The force megaminxes were probably the most time-consuming to make just because of how darn many of them there are, but that also means you get lots of cool color choices, and it's just a really fun little puzzle to play around with. The force mastermorphixes, made out of some Shengshao puzzles, look really cool and have the advantage of actually being solvable because they shapeshift, so you have to get them back into this tetrahedron. The same thing applies to the force ready barrels. These ones are actually really easy though. And if you see my videos on these, you'll notice it's actually pretty unique to be able to make a force barrel in the first place, just because of how these original puzzles were made. And finally, you might not have even noticed them, the world's smallest force cubes. Made out of these little tiny 2cm 3x3s, the smallest stickerless puzzles you can even make these out of. Besides the shiny ones, these are definitely some of my top favorite force cubes, despite being kind of a pain to make. Now to transition into the next couple rows of miscellaneous non-WCA puzzles, we have something that's kind of like a force cube, except not really. These are the piece swap mods using Chi jelly cubes. There's actually two of each of them because I started with two of each puzzle, a normal one and a jelly one, and then swapped them around in this cool checker pattern. They're fully functional cubes that you can solve just like any other, except they'll look cooler while you're doing it, and the two different variants are pretty much identical. You can choose which one you want to buy. The only real difference is which color piece the logo is on. These are the 3x3 and 4x4 calendar cubes made with sticker sets from the Cubicle. Basically, you can twist them around to make them display any date of the year, and based on the dates currently displayed, you can tell that I don't exactly use them much. This is the lineup of Shengshao Mr. M, Square 0, Square 1, and Square 2, all just kind of different jokes, variations on the Square 1. You can actually swap around the pieces and combine them to make really interesting puzzles, but as it stands, it's a really easy Square 1, a normal Square 1, and a much harder Square 1, and they're all magnetic too. These are the Skewb mix-up 1, 2, and 3 from Mofeng Zhaoxi. They turn just like normal Skewbs, except once you do a half turn like this, you can actually twist these inner pieces and do some crazy dumbling moves like that. So it's a lot of work swapping around all those extra little pieces. If you can solve a normal Skewb, you might be able to figure this one out on your own. This one's going to be a bit more of a challenge, and this one I couldn't even figure out. Next up are the Shengshao Morphix puzzles, from 2x2 all the way up to 10x10, which I'll show you in a minute. These are actually all stickerless puzzles with identical color schemes from Shengshao. They all turn reasonably well too. And on top of that, they're also really fun puzzles to solve. The 9x9 and 10x10 are definitely some of the most difficult, time-consuming, biggest, and most expensive puzzles I have ever solved personally. So if you're looking for a challenge, try and pick up one of these. The Shengshao clocks are a funny little lineup. We have the normal 4-pin magnetic clock, the little 3-pin magnetic clock, and the big old 5-pin magnetic clock. They all solve pretty similarly to a normal clock. There's not really a whole lot of extra challenge, just extra pieces, or fewer pieces in that case. The Qi Fluffy 3x3 is a 3x3 that's fluffy. What else is there to say? In all seriousness though, it is just a normal Rubik's Cube, it just looks a little bit funky. The Qi 6-spot cube turns like this. It's kind of like a Skewb but with fewer pieces. It's actually the exact same puzzle as an Ivy Cube, if you know what that is. The Qi Super Ivy Cube, on the other hand, is much more difficult than a Skewb. I accidentally bought myself a second one, not realizing that I already had one when I was making my Rex TO. The Polaris Cube is also very Skewb-like, except before doing a single Skewb turn, you have to misalign all of these corner pieces, like this, and now it becomes a Skewb. You can also misalign the other ones and basically just solve it like a Skewb. Of course, the outer pieces can also get mixed up with each other, which actually makes it fairly challenging to solve. The Shengshao Crazy 3x3 is pretty much just a 3x3, except it can start doing some crazy things like this and start to look incredibly mixed up. From my experience though, you can normally just solve it like a normal 3x3 and then fix a couple things at the end. It's really not as difficult as it looks. This is the Unicorn Cube. This is the original puzzle those Force Cubes were made out of, and as you can see, slightly less useless than the Force Cubes, but still ridiculously easy to solve. This is the YJ Star Barrel. I just realized we're now at 7 puzzles in a row that come from my non-Cuber unboxings, but this one is a simple little puzzle. It takes a bit of creativity to solve it in terms of coming up with algorithms, but other than that, it's not too bad. This is the Yushin Master Pyraminx, kind of like a bigger 4x4 version of a normal Pyraminx. Actually a really fun puzzle to solve, especially if you already know how to solve a Pyraminx. The turning of this one is not bad, but you do have to be really precise with it. This is an older puzzle, the Meffert's Pyraminx Duo. It turns something like this. It's actually really easy to learn how to solve, a nice little beginner puzzle. These are the higher order Shengshao Jing Pyraminxes. A Jing Pyraminx is basically just a Pyraminx but with a centerpiece in the middle, and these are the bigger versions of that. So this is like a 4x4, a 5x5, and a 6x6. It's really fun to solve. They're actually very similar to their cubic counterparts, so you can solve it kind of like a 6x6, just using reduction, build the centers, build the edges, solve it like a Pyraminx. This is Moyu's lineup of 6 specialty Pyraminx style puzzles. I'm not going to go through every single one of them. You can watch my video if you want to see how they all turn, but they range from the useless corner twist Pyraminx that I made the Force Cubes out of, all the way up to this thing, which is basically a Jing Pyraminx that actually is a little bit difficult to solve. This is a lineup of different shaped Qi gear puzzles that didn't quite make it on the shelf. Oops. But basically we have a barrel and a ball, which are basically the exact same thing as a normal gear cube, but in a different shape. And then the gear Pyraminx is something totally different. It's kind of a pain to turn, but it definitely would be an interesting challenge to solve, to say the least. Now it's time for our final 3 rows of WCA puzzles, ranging from somewhat old to brand new, starting with a couple of Megaminxes. This one's a little more towards the older side. It's the X-Man Galaxy V2, non-magnetic, in this interesting whole puzzle concave feel. I was gonna do a project with this years ago, but never got around to it, so it's basically still brand new. Likewise, these are all gonna be puzzles that haven't been my main and I haven't used very heavily over the years. So this is another X-Man Galaxy V2, but this one is magnetic. Again, I've used this as like a warm-up cube over the years, but never really actually speed solved on it. This is the YJ Yufu V2, a really nice basic magnetic 7x7 that's actually surprisingly cheap and turns pretty well. The X-Man Shadow 6x6 on the other hand was not cheap. It was a top of the line 6x6 back a handful of years ago. It still turns fairly well, it is magnetic, and obviously it's going to be quite a lot cheaper now that I'm selling it. Jumping up to the newest and fanciest cube in this entire video so far, we have the X-Man Hong 5x5. This is an incredible speed cube, UV coated, magnetic, and it even has a ball core. Unfortunately, it happened to come out just before the GAN 5x5, which I liked a little bit better, but hey, now someone else can get their hands on it for a little bit cheaper than that one. The Qi MS 5x5 is just a really basic budget speed cube. It is magnetic, so great for a beginner. It'll be really cheap. And jumping back to another old school high-end speed cube, we have the Cubicle's Angstrom version of the Aochuang GTS M 5x5. So a good speed cube, but nothing to write home about by modern standards, but it is set up really nicely with angstrom loops, which has hardly even been broken in. This 4x4 is even more old school, the Qi Wutui. It doesn't even have magnets in it, but I would say the turning still mostly holds up by modern standards. It's really not bad. And these are about as old school as I'll go with speed cubes in this video. These are the New Island Windstorm 4x4s in black and stickerless. Again, super basic cubes, non-magnetic. They turn alright, good for a beginner, they'll be super cheap. The Qi MS 4x4, another really cheap basic cube, but at least we now have magnets in there, so it's not terrible. Then we take a huge step up to the Volk 4M. I'd say this cube still holds up by modern standards. I still use it for speed solving occasionally, although I have two of them. This is the one I think with slightly stronger magnets. And this one doesn't have the logo, but this is another angstrom version of an older 4x4 speed cube, this time the Aosu GTS2M. I'd say it's a decent cube, magnetic, needs some breaking in of that lube. Now it's time for a few cubes. These are all very new. This is the X-Men Wingy V2, an amazing speed cube, especially if you like this concave grip shape to it. I would probably be using this cube as my main if the Gans cube didn't exist. It really is an amazing puzzle. This is another pretty recent budget cube, the Moyu RS cube, and despite being really cheap, it still turns really well. And the Moyu Weilong Maglev cube is kind of like an upgraded version of the last one. Super ridiculously fast, feels like the most raw performance I've ever seen in this cube. The Qi MS Pyraminx, I think you know the drill at this point, just a solid budget magnetic cube that would be great for a beginner, really cheap. This is the Moyu RS Pyraminx, the standard version and the purple Maglev version. This is a much more modern budget Pyraminx. The standard one turns fine. I like using the Maglev one a little bit better just because it turns so much faster. These are the Gan Pyraminxes, the Explorer version and the enhanced version. Both of them come with these extra set of GES nuts, which I'll be sure to throw in. They're pretty standard high-end Pyraminx speed cubes like you'd expect from Gan, just not my absolute favorite turning. The only difference between them is that the Explorer only has core magnets, whereas the enhanced has both core magnets and piece magnets for a bit of a stronger magnetic click. And finally, we have the X-Man Bell V2, another great option for a modern high-end speed cube. Honestly, one of my favorite Pyraminxes out there. It has adjustable magnets. It's just a really nice cube. On to the final shelf. I guess this first 2x2 isn't quite WCA. It's a Cyclone Boy Shiny 2x2, the same thing that I made the Force Cubes out of. It's magnetic, it turns pretty well except for those lockups that I talked about earlier. The YJ Glow in the Dark 2x2 is easily the worst turning thing on this shelf, but hey, it glows in the dark and it's really cheap. What else can you ask for? The YJ Guanpo Plus is also really old and really cheap, but a bit more focused on being a speed cube. It turns alright. The Guoguan Jinghen TSM is a pretty good magnetic speed cube with the gimmick that you can change its size. It comes with this terrifying adjustment tool that you can use to pop off the caps and use the adjustment system to make the cube a little bit bigger. And the Qi MS 2x2, I think you know the drill by now. It's an alright speed cube and really cheap. And now for something completely different. To start out my section on smart cubes, this is the Merge Cube. Basically, it can be used as an augmented reality Rubik's Cube. It comes with this headset here that you can stick your smartphone inside, and then when you look at the cube through your phone's camera, it can turn it into one of many things, including a Rubik's Cube. Definitely check out my old video on it if you want to see how it works exactly. I think they still support the app, but because it's a little bit older now, you might have a hard time fitting a modern smartphone inside of here. I think it's the perfect size for something like an iPhone 6, 7, or 8, but if it's any bigger than that, you might have a little bit of a tight fit. Next up, and almost certainly the most expensive puzzle I own, the Wow Cube. If you're crazy enough to buy one of these, you almost certainly already know what it is. Basically, it's an electronic Rubik's Cube that has screens on every single piece. It's kind of like a smartphone, but in Rubik's Cube form. There's a whole bunch of different apps on it, and you can interact by violently tapping on it like this, or of course twisting the cube. So here's the Rubik's Cube app right here. It's literally just a 2x2 that you can solve. As you can see, I did it right there in 26 seconds. Woohoo! There's a whole bunch of fun games and stuff too. I'm sure there's a whole lot more since I last tried it. One thing that I will warn you is that this plastic scratches very easily. Mine does have one decent scratch across one piece. It's not super noticeable though. I've also had some occasional connection issues with one particular piece. I think it's slightly damaged on the inside, and sometimes I have to reach down there with something metal to reset the puzzle. So just don't expect it to be a perfectly new functional puzzle. It will be priced accordingly. And of course, I'll also send along the carrying case with all the charging accessories that came with it, along with these little rubber bumpers that you can install on top of it if you want. This is the Geiger Supercube i2, the first 2x2 smart cube that was released, and from everything I've tried, it works pretty well. It comes with a disposable battery, which might need to be replaced pretty soon. Of course, I have gone through all my smart cubes and double checked that they're still functional before selling them. I do have a couple of very expensive smart cubes, cough cough GAN, that aren't working anymore, which is why they're not on this shelf. This is the Geiger Supercube i3S, an updated version of what was the very first smart cube released by Geiger. If you want to know the differences between all these 3x3 smart cubes coming up, you should really just check out my comparison video from a couple years back. But basically this one turns pretty well, but it's really a great choice if you're more into games than speed cubing. The Rubiks Connected is a very similar story, but it's made by a different company, so it has a different assortment of games. Just a solid smart cube at a decent price. Not the best turning, but not the worst either. The Hey Cube is, or I guess I should say was, a very interesting smart cube concept that promised to show you how to solve the cube without using an app. I charged this thing up a couple days ago and it it looks like the battery has already died. I promise it is at least capable of lighting up though, but it was a little bit confused about what the solid state was. Also, you can no longer get the app on your smartphone, so needless to say, this thing will be priced accordingly. It might be a nice collector's item though. Jumping back to something that actually functions really well, we have the original GAN iCarry. This is just a really solid speed cube from GAN, and even though it's a little bit older, it works with their modern app, which is constantly being updated, and it comes with a disposable battery, so you don't have to worry about charging it all the time. I will mention that all the smart cubes with rechargeable batteries will come with all the cables and docks required to charge them, and that includes the GAN i3, a little bit more of a modern GAN smart cube. Turning is a little bit better, it is rechargeable, just a really solid puzzle. This is the Cyclone Boys Shiny 3x3, the same puzzle I used to make the Force cubes. It is magnetic, and I will say this is perhaps the most damaged puzzle in my collection. You can see there's little scratches all over it, even some big scrapes like right there. So it's not in great cosmetic shape, but it still turns great and looks pretty cool. And the rest of these cubes are all just normal 3x3 speed cubes. Starting with the YJ Guanlong Plus, a non-magnetic, super cheap, just budget 3x3. It turns okay, it's really cheap. This is the Rubik Speed 3x3, which was actually designed by GAN, which actually makes it turn pretty darn well for a Rubik's brand. It's really nothing special as far as speed cubes go. It's non-magnetic, but it does have these nice built-in tiles that gives you that black stickered look while still being extremely durable. This is the Mofeng Xiaoxi MF3RS2. It's basically the predecessor to the RS3 lineup of puzzles, which is extremely popular nowadays. So it's basically the same thing except a little bit older, a little bit more basic, no magnets, and very cheap. This is the Shengshao Pearl 3x3, another really old non-magnetic speed cube that honestly holds up pretty well considering how old it is, but is nothing special by today's standards and will be priced accordingly. This is the Guoguan Yuxiao Pro, which despite also being very old and non-magnetic, has a very unique turning style. I would say it turns a lot better than the last few. It's very smooth and kind of clacky. Someone with a very particular type of turning might really enjoy this cube. And finally, my last non-stickerless speed cube, the Guoguan Yuxiao EDM. This one is pretty similar to the last one, except it actually does have magnets. In fact, it was one of the very first speed cubes to have adjustable magnet strength. A little bit basic and blocky, but it'll be cheap, and the turning is definitely unique by today's standards. Now, just a couple more rando cubes here. This is the last one that doesn't have magnets. It's the Sen Juan Mars S. It's a super weird cube. It's not bad or anything, it's just not anything special. This is the Cubicle Pro Shop Yulong V2M, another one of those earlier magnetic puzzles, but this one nicely set up by the Cubicle, so it feels very overlubed right now because I haven't broken it in at all in years. Basically just a middle of the road, older magnetic cube that comes with a nice lube setup. The Qi MS3x3, another early magnetic puzzle. Again, it turns fine and it's really cheap. The YJ MGC3 Elite is also a little bit older, but it has much more modern performance than just about anything else I've talked about yet. It has adjustable magnet strength and just really nice, snappy, satisfying turning. Okay, now we're in the realm of what I would consider modern 3x3 speed cubes. First off, we have the classic RS3M 2020, which basically revolutionized the budget 3x3 industry. It's an amazing puzzle for a super cheap price. This is the RS3M with maglev, so it's pretty much the same thing with some minor improvements, except it's a lot faster because of that maglev. This is the RS3M Super with both maglev and a ball core, so just as fast as the last one, with slightly better performance, just a slightly newer speed cube. And finally, we have the Huameng YS3M. This is the top of the line version with maglev, a ball core, and UV coating. Just an incredible modern speed cube, just very snappy, fast performance. I feel like someone with a very aggressive turning style might enjoy this cube. Just a very nice, satisfying flagship all around. This is the X-Man Tornado V3 Pioneer version, which means it has maglev and a ball core. This would be absolutely one of my favorite cubes of all time if it weren't so darn fast. I just can't quite control it, but I'm sure for some people it would be one of the best speed cubes out there. And this is the X-Man Tornado V4 Pioneer, which has all the same features as the V3 and also has UV coating, these bizarre extra repelling edge magnets, and the turning is a little bit strange, a little bit less flexible, and a lot more controlling than the V3. But yeah, literally a brand new top of the line flagship speed cube that only has a couple solves on it. And in that same vein of brand new, just released flagships, we have the Fengzhen Hudong Lite 3x3. I love this puzzle, but I have 3 of them, so here's the other 2. So this is the standard version and the ultra version. This one, even at its normal price, is an absolute steal for such a unique puzzle. It has a bunch of extra magnets to make it ultra flexible, yet still ultra controllable. And this is the same thing, but it also has UV coating and maglev, so it's a little bit faster, but still strangely controllable. And finally, we have my GAN 3x3s. This is an older one, the Cubicle's max version of the GAN 356X. And even though it's older, the turning is honestly one of my favorites from GAN. It has this almost blocky, super controllable feeling that you don't get in modern GAN cubes, and obviously it's set up really nicely too. This is the GAN Air M, also on the older side, but still absolutely holds up by today's standards. This was more of a budget release, but that doesn't really mean much when it comes from GAN. This is the GAN 12M Leap and the GAN 12M Maglev. This is the point where I stopped really caring about modern GAN cubes. They turn really well, they have really good performance, but they just don't really fit with my turning style anymore. And frankly, they haven't really changed much since the 12, so I'm just gonna keep my 15 and be happy with it. A lot of people do consider the 12 to still be the best though. Then the GAN 13 was pretty similar when it comes to features. You still have maglev and UV coating and everything, but a bit of a departure when it comes to turning. I would say the turning feels a little bit nicer, but the performance is a little bit worse. And finally, the GAN 14, you once again have maglev, UV coating, all sorts of crazy adjustments, auto turning, all the stuff you'd expect from GAN. I would say it probably turns better than the 13, but maybe not quite as good as the 12. Still a pretty decent cube all around though. I should also mention that all of those GAN cubes will come with whatever fancy boxes, extra magnets, GES nuts, and tensioning tools, anything that came with them in the box, I'll be sure to send along. But yeah, that is all the puzzles that I'm selling. I tried to pick out everything that was still in good condition, would still be relevant for cubers today, yet I don't have a particular attachment to keep in my collection. And again, me and my collection aren't going anywhere. I still have twice as many cubes as this that I'm keeping before you even count the 1,000 identical 3x3s. I figured now would be a good time since last year I decided on making my final ever full collection video. It was just getting a little bit out of hand at that point. I tried to make all the prices very reasonable. The Force cubes are all a little bit cheaper than their original puzzles, and then everything else is much cheaper than it was originally. And make sure to keep on checking back, because whatever doesn't sell right away, I'll keep on lowering the prices week after week until it does sell. Be sure and read the description down below to learn how to request those free signed bags, screwdrivers, cube boxes, and cube stands, or all of the above with your order. I'm also happy to sign any cubes you buy, or even do some fun piece swap mods on these Force cubes, as long as you request it like I describe in the description below. Anyway, I've pretty much lost my voice at this point as usual, so that's pretty much it. Be sure and leave a comment down below with the word flamingo to let me know that you've made it this far, and I'll see you guys next time.